guys? Today we're going to continue with college football predictions with Week 5. And we're already at Week 5 already? Feel like the season's going by very fast. Anyway, record for last week was 24-4. And my overall record is 57-17. Now, I have did some thinking and I don't know if I'm going to keep it. Because last week I felt like I did a lot of games. I covered a lot. And going forward, I don't know if I'm going to try to cut it down to like 20 or 15 or just keep it smaller because I don't want these videos to drag. Again, these are just for fun. But while I gather my thoughts on that, let's take a look at this week's games. Starting off with a Friday nighter with the Louisville Cardinals taking on the North Carolina State Wolfpack, with NC State barely escaping Virginia, and Louisville, they got to win. I think they're 4-0. That's all I know. They're 4-0. And who I'm choosing, by the way, Louisville beat Boston College. Even though normally in these Friday games, I will lean towards the home team, but since NC State haven't impressed me at all this season, I'm going to go with the road team. I'm going to roll for the Louisville Cardinals. Next, we have a big Pac-12 matchup between the Utah Utes taking on the Oregon State Beavers. Oregon State, they actually lost to Washington State. I called that. And as for Utah, they won a low-scoring, hard-fought match over UCLA. Now, there have been rumors that Cam Rising could return for this week. If you don't know, last at the Rose Bowl he tore his ACL, which doomed Utah. But I think in this game, I think Oregon State will bounce back and get a win over Utah. And we're still not done with the Friday games. Of the two new Big 12 newcomers, the Cincinnati Bearcats are traveling to BYU to take on the Bears. Yes, the Baylor Bears. Wait, no. The BYU Cougars. My apologies to the Mormons. And both schools lost their conference openers. Cincinnati losing to Oklahoma, BYU losing to Kansas. And for this game, I'm going to probably pick the home team here. I'm going to roll with BYU to win. Now we're on a Saturday. We got the Texas A&M Aggies taking on the Arkansas Razorbacks. And I believe this game's in Jerry World, as this rivalry has always played in AT&T Stadium. For this game, last year, I think A&M surprised everyone and won that game last year. While for the Razorbacks, I think this year will probably be the exact opposite. I'm going to pick Arkansas to win. Next we have is Penn State taking on Northwestern, and we pretty much know that Penn State's going to win, despite Northwestern having a very nice comfort behind victory over Minnesota. Kudos to them. And now we have the Syracuse Orange traveling to Clemson to take on the Tigers. Clemson last week, they actually had a decent showing until Cade Klubnik had a costly fumble that led to a scoop and score, and Florida State will wind up winning that game in overtime. Now Clemson, their season is not over. They could still make the ACC title game. They just got to run the table. But when you're 0-2 in the conference, it's going to be really, really rough for that to happen. Meanwhile, Syracuse, they're decent. I don't know who they played last week. They might have played a no-name school, for all I know. And with this game being in Death Valley, I am going to roll with Clemson to win. Yes, they lost in Death Valley last week, but I think Clemson, there's no way they fall 2 in a row, right? Next, we have a game that I intended on having as the game of the week if it was like 2 weeks ago. The USC Trojans traveling to Colorado to take on the Buffaloes. Colorado, they got shellacked by Oregon. And I knew because of I think Colorado lacks the size of Oregon, I knew they were going to struggle. Meanwhile, USC they got a win on the road against Arizona State. They came off of a bye week doing that. And yeah, I think this one's going to be pretty same. But I will hope Colorado put up more points than what they did last week. But I'm going to roll with the USC Trojans. Next we have is the Florida Gators taking on the Kentucky Wildcats. And Kentucky, they beat Vanderbilt last week. And Florida, they beat some. I think they beat Charlotte. They didn't score a lot of points in that game, but a win's a win. Now normally when these two schools play together, Kentucky usually owns them. Will it be the case this game? I've gone back and forth on this, and I think I'm gonna go with the upset. I'm gonna roll with Kentucky to win at home against Florida. Next, we have two teams that are desperate for a win. The Virginia Cavaliers taking on the Boston College Eagles. I'm just going to take Boston College, and I'm basing this pick off of their showing against Florida State. Next, we have is the Arizona State Sun Devils taking on the California Bears. And I'm going to go ahead and take California to win. I'm going to lean towards the home team here. I don't know much about these two schools, but I'm just going to roll with them. Then we have the Deep South oldest rivalry. The number one ranked Georgia Bulldogs traveling to Auburn to take on the Tigers. Auburn last week, they got destroyed by Texas A&M, pretty much on all fronts. Georgia, again, for Georgia, they took a lot of time for them to get going, but they did get the win over UAB. And I think that's going to be something to keep your eye on about Georgia. A slow starting team, but they get better and stronger as the game goes on. And with this game, I'm taking Georgia to win. I won't be surprised if Auburn jumps out on them. I'll say that. Next we have is BYU taking on the UCF Central Florida. I think they're the Knights. Yeah, they're the Knights. BYU got destroyed by Texas last week, and UCF lost to Kansas State in their Big 12 opener. I think this game, UCF will bounce back, and I got them beating Baylor to win. Next we have is the Michigan Wolverines. I believe they're ranked number 2 in the country, traveling to Nebraska to take on the Cornhuskers. Nebraska, who got an 0-2 start, they won their last two. Granted, it was against no-name opponents, but it'll build something. They need this to build confidence. As for Michigan, them and Georgia are more similarities than you think. Because again, Michigan got off to a very slow start against Rutgers before turning it on. And Georgia last week, they did the same thing against UAB. These two, Michigan and Georgia, they don't know how to start off fast in games. And I hope that don't come back to bite them. But for this game, and focusing on Michigan, yeah, I got them winning this one. But I will say Nebraska could hang on. It's a conference game. They will come out on fire. They could hang on. Something I'll keep my eye on. Next we have is the Houston Cougars taking on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And I just found out when I looked at my phone that the Texas Tech starting quarterback, Tyler Shaw, broke his fibula and he'll be pretty much out 6 to 8 weeks. And in college terms, out for the rest of the regular season. Houston, we have a problem. They already lost their conference opener a week ago against TCU. But Houston, way I see Houston, they're not a good football team this year. I'm going to grow with Texas Tech to win. Next we have is Indiana taking on Maryland. And for Maryland, they're a very underrated team in the Big Ten. I'm going to roll with Maryland to win. Next we have A better matchup than you expect. The Kansas Jayhawks, ranked 25th in the country, taking on the Texas Hook'em Horns Longhorns. And, well, beat Texas, destroyed Baylor. Kansas, they took care of BYU. But I think in this game, I think Texas will be way too much for Kansas to handle. I'm going to roll with the Hook'em Horns to win this one. Next we have is the Fighting Illini taking on the Purdue Boilermakers. Purdue, they're Purdue. Illinois, I don't know much about this school, but I am going to roll with the road team, Illinois. Because one thing I know about Purdue is they're not that great at home. I don't know why it's that, but hey, yeah, I'm just going to roll with Illinois to win. Next we have is the Missouri Tigers taking on the Vanderbilt Commodores. If you remember last week, I almost took Vanderbilt over Kentucky to win. Glad I didn't. And for Missouri, they won. I don't know if they won last week. They might have did, but I'm pretty unsure of who they played. But yeah, I'm gonna pick Missouri to win. That team has really exceeded all of its early expectations so far this year. Next we have is the LSU Tigers taking on the Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss, they got off to a hot start against Alabama. They had a 7-6 halftime lead. And then the tide rolled in the second half. And Lane Kiffin Lane Kiffin himself. Again. He always does that whenever he takes on Nick Saban. He always try to outthink him. And it fails. Meanwhile, LSU, they had to get a hard-fought win over Arkansas. And while it's just Arkansas, that school always give LSU problems, whether they're in Death Valley at night or not. I think this one's kind of a toss-up. It's more of a toss-up than you think. Will Ole Miss bounce back, or will we expose them as frauds? I'm just going to go with the safe pick. I'm going with the road team, LSU, to win. Next we have the Oregon Ducks taking on the Stanford Cardinals. I'm taking Oregon to win easily. I think they shouldn't have no problems. Even though 2 years ago, Stanford did upset them. But I don't think that's going to happen this year. No. Moving on to Iowa State taking on the Oklahoma Boomer Sooners. I'm going to roll with the Boomer Sooners to win over Iowa State. Followed by the South Carolina Gamecocks taking on the Tennessee Volunteers. And if you remember anything last year, South Carolina upset Tennessee in South Carolina. And that was the game I think Hendon Hooker hurt his knee. But I think Tennessee, they're going to have that mentality. They've had that in the back of their mind. And it could get ugly. But I got Tennessee winning pretty big over South Carolina. Although South Carolina, they're better than what their record indicates. Because while they got destroyed by North Carolina, they hung tight with Georgia in the first half. I will give South Carolina credit on that. Followed by the mess of the Big Ten. The Michigan State Spartans, now without the head coach Mel Tucker, and the Iowa Hawkeyes, who have fallen well behind on this 325 points that need to keep their offensive coordinator's job. Because last week, he didn't make a good case at all when they got blanked by Penn State. I think they had like 4 first downs the entire game. Yeah, that offensive coordinator will not be back for them next year. Meanwhile, Michigan State, they got blown out by Maryland. And I'm just going to roll with Iowa to win. Because I do think they're a slightly better football team than Michigan State. So I'm going to go with Iowa. And I send my waves to the Kinnick Children's Hospital there. And now followed by the West Virginia Mountaineers taking on the TCU Horned Frogs. And I've forgotten who both of these schools played. So with that being said, I'm gonna roll with TCU to win. Next we have is the two teams you should not trust in the ACC, the Pitt Panthers and the Virginia Tech Hokies. Pitt lost to North Carolina last week. Virginia Tech, they lost to Marshall. And I know it's just Marshall, but yeah, but you think Virginia Tech, a Power 5 school, would do so much better than that. Honestly, this school has not been the same since Frank Beamer retired. But for this game, I do think Pitt will bounce back. They have benched Jurkovec. They played that other guy. They played the other guy in the second half of that North Carolina game, and he did decent. But I think he could elevate the team to the next level. So I'm gonna roll with Pitt over Virginia Tech. Then we have the Alabama Crimson Tide traveling to Mississippi State to take on the Bulldogs. And this game's taking place at 9 o'clock Eastern for some reason. Although for Mississippi State people, that's 8 o'clock their time. But Alabama, they rallied and came together thanks to the running game to beat Ole Miss. Mississippi State, they lost to South Carolina, I believe. And with Mississippi State pretty much struggling already early in this season, I know they can't afford to go 0-3 in conference play, but I'm sorry, that's exactly what's going to happen. As I see Alabama rolling over Mississippi State. All their fake problems they had this offseason, this past couple of weeks, they'll be distant memories. And that'll be followed by Washington taking on the Arizona Wildcats. And right now, my Heisman pick is easily Michael Penix Jr. This guy, he's like throwing 400 yards every game, like 4 TDs every game. He's my pick for the Heisman Trophy. And I think he'll have another vintage performance in him against the Arizona Wildcats. And finally, the game of the week. Once again, I am featuring the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. But this time, there we go on the road taking on the Duke Blue Devils. Now, Notre Dame, last week I picked them to beat the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ask me how well that went. It didn't go well at all. Well, they lost in the very last second, so it was one of those close games. Meanwhile, for Duke, ever since they beat Clemson, they've been quietly putting up these wins over no-name schools. Although Northwestern is not a no-name school, and neither is UConn, but okay, whatever. Other than that, Duke really hasn't faced this hard of a challenge this deep in the season since week 1. And this will be a true test to see if Duke's really real. So for this game, I know College Game Day is going to be in Durham for the first time for football. I think Notre Dame's going to be I think they're going to be a little too much for them to handle. But I do expect both Sam Hartman and Riley Leonard to put up together great efforts for this game. So those are some of my college picks. Tell me what y'all think about this in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.